She thought it was an innocent call. He thought it was a message from the past. When Chiara answered her phone in Italian, she thought no one understood Italian. But the Mafia boss did, and when he heard what she whispered on that call, the entire air in the private jet shifted. Glasses stopped clinking, men stopped talking. She had no idea it would capture the attention of the most dangerous man in Sicily and change her life forever. And Don Vittorio Rossi gave only one order: don't let her leave. What did Chiara say? And why did it shake the most feared man in the city? Black Rose. Before the story starts, remember to subscribe. Don't miss a single moment of this gripping story. This channel delivers dark mafia tales, emotional twists, and intense secrets that cut deeper than bullets. Every episode pulls you deeper into the underworld. Don't miss the next one. Now let's begin. The private jet cut through the clouds like a silver blade. Below, the island of Sicily lay sprawled in the sun, a patchwork of golden fields and deep green olive groves. Inside, Chiara Lombardo smoothed the wrinkles from her black pencil skirt. She was a junior lawyer, 26 years old, with a sharp mind and a life that was, until this moment, predictable. New York was all she knew. The rush of the subway, the towering glass buildings, the anonymous crowds. Sicily was different. It felt ancient, heavy. Her boss, Mr. Henderson, sipped his scotch across the aisle. Remember, Lombardo, you're here to observe and take notes. Scaletta Industries is a massive player in European shipping. This hotel acquisition is a formality for them, but a huge win for us. Be polite, be professional, be invisible. Invisible, Chiara repeated, the word tasting like a promise. She could do that. What she didn't know was that the man they were meeting, Don Vittorio Rossi, was more than a shipping magnate. In the financial newspapers, he was a visionary businessman. In the whispered conversations of Palermo's back alleys, he was the capo di tutti capi, the boss of all bosses. His word was law, his power absolute, and his past was a locked vault. 3 hours later, their car pulled through massive iron-wrought gates. The Rossi villa was not just a house. It was a fortress of pale stone, perched on a cliff, overlooking the churning blue Mediterranean. Bougainvillea spilled over balconies in violent bursts of purple and red. It was beautiful, but it felt like a gilded cage. 2 men in impeccably tailored suits met them at the door. They didn't speak. They simply opened the doors and gestured them inside. Their eyes, cold and assessing, scanned Chiara and Henderson before dismissing them. But Chiara felt a chill. These weren't ordinary security guards. Their stillness was predatory. They were led into a study that smelled of old leather, cigars, and power. The walls were lined with books, and a massive dark wood desk dominated the room. And there, standing by a grand fireplace, was Don Vittorio Rossi. He was taller than she had imagined. He looked to be in his late 40s, with strands of silver weaving through his dark, perfectly styled hair. He wore a simple gray suit that cost more than her yearly rent. But it wasn't his clothes that commanded the room. It was his presence. He exuded a calm, terrifying authority. When his eyes, the color of dark honey, landed on her, she felt a jolt, like a sudden cold current in a warm sea. He looked at her for a second too long, a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze, before turning to Henderson. "Mr. Henderson?" His voice was a deep baritone, smooth yet edged with gravel. "Welcome." "The pleasure is ours, Don Rossi," Henderson said, his usual bluster replaced by a respectful tone Chiara had never heard before. The negotiations began. Chiara sat slightly behind Henderson, her laptop open, her fingers flying across the keys. She was the picture of professionalism, but her heart was pounding. She could feel the weight of the silent men standing around the room. She could feel the weight of Don Vittorio's occasional fleeting glances. An hour in, her phone vibrated in her pocket. A familiar, joyful ringtone she'd forgotten to silence. She flinched. Henderson shot her a sharp look. Glancing down, she saw the caller ID, Nonna Agata, her grandmother, the woman who had raised her, who had taught her Italian, who was her only real family. A wave of homesickness, sharp and sudden, washed over her. She couldn't ignore it. "Mi scusi," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I am so sorry. It is my grandmother. It will be one moment." She didn't wait for permission. She stood up, her chair scraping softly on the marble floor, and hurried towards the large open balcony doors, seeking a sliver of privacy. The Mediterranean sun was warm on her skin. She leaned against the balustrade, the sea stretching out endlessly before her, and answered the call. "Pronto, nonna, ci sei," she said, her voice instantly softening, melting into the melodic cadence of her native tongue. Inside the study, the conversation halted. Don Vittorio had been in the middle of a sentence. His hand, holding a pen, froze. His head turned slowly, precisely, towards the balcony. His eyes narrowed. His consigliere, an older, lean man named Enzo, followed his gaze. The other men in the room shifted their weight, their hands moving subtly towards the jackets where their weapons were hidden. The air, already tense, became electric. They didn't understand the words, but they understood the tone. They understood the dialect. It was the pure, unadulterated Sicilian of the old villages, the kind their mothers and grandmothers spoke. It was a language of home, of secrets, of the past. To Chiara's, it was a loving conversation. "Stai mangiando, piccola mia?" Her grandmother's crackly voice came through. "Are you eating, my little one?" "Sì, nonna, ti prometto," Chiara replied, a smile in her voice. "Yes, grandma, I promise. Mi manchi tanto, la casa è troppo silenziosa senza di te. I miss you so much. The house is too quiet without you. Anche tu mi manchi, nonna. Ti voglio bene. I miss you too, grandma. I love you." She spoke for another minute, promising to call later, before hanging up. She took a deep, steadying breath, the familiar words a comfort. She had no idea that the simple, loving phrase, "Piccola mia," my little one, had just detonated a silent bomb in the study behind her. For Don Vittorio Rossi, that term of endearment was a spear through time. It was the exact same phrase, in the exact same Agrigento dialect, that his own mother had whispered to him every night before bed. A phrase he had not heard from another living soul since her murder 30 years ago. A murder that had never been solved, a wound that had never healed. Who was this young American woman? How did she speak that forgotten dialect so perfectly? Was it a coincidence? A message? A threat? Chiara turned and walked back into the study, her face apologetic. "My deepest apologies for the interruption." The room was silent. Henderson looked pale. The armed men were statues, and Don Vittorio. He was staring at her with an intensity that stole the air from her lungs. His gaze was no longer casually observant. It was penetrating, analytical, and utterly terrifying. It was the look of a predator that had just identified its prey. The meeting concluded shortly after. The atmosphere irreparably changed. The final handshakes were stiff. As Chiara and Henderson were led towards the door, Don Vittorio stood by the fireplace, his posture rigid. He didn't look at them. He stared into the flames. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to Enzo, who stood by the door. Enzo leaned in close as they passed. The Don regrets that the discussions ran long. He insists you stay for dinner as his guests. Your things will be brought from your hotel. Henderson began to protest. That's very kind, but our schedule. It is not a request, Enzo said softly, his voice leaving no room for argument. The main oak door, which had been open, was now closed. A large man stood in front of it. Chiara's heart hammered against her ribs. A cold dread trickled down her spine. They were not guests. They were prisoners. As Enzo led a confused Henderson away to discuss logistics, Don Vittorio finally turned from the fireplace. His eyes found Chiara's across the room. He walked towards her, each step slow and deliberate, echoing in the vast, silent hall. He stopped mere inches from her. She could smell his cologne, bergamot, leather, and something wild like the sea during a storm. He was so close, she could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes, the faint scar on his chin, the absolute unyielding power in his expression. He reached out, and for a heart-stopping moment, she thought he would touch her. Instead, he gently plucked the visitor's security pass from the lanyard around her neck. His voice was a low, chilling whisper, meant only for her. You are our guest now, Miss Lombardo. Make yourself comfortable. He turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, frozen and terrified. As he disappeared down a dark corridor, she heard his command, spoken to one of his shadows, a command that sealed her fate. Don't let her leave. The heavy door to the guest suite clicked shut behind Chiara, the sound as final as a judge's gavel. She stood frozen in the center of an opulent room. It was beautiful, with silk-covered walls, a vaulted ceiling, and French doors that led to a private balcony. But the beauty was a lie. It was a gilded cage. Her first instinct was panic, a cold, sharp terror that made her lungs burn. She rushed to the door and twisted the handle, locked. She ran to the French doors, throwing them open to step onto the balcony. The view was breathtaking. The moon painted a silver path across the dark, endless sea. But when she looked down, her hope plummeted. They were on the second floor, a sheer drop onto jagged rocks below. When she looked at the sides of the balcony, she saw thin, almost invisible bars integrated into the ornate ironwork. She was well and truly trapped. Her mind raced. Why? What had she done? The phone call. It had to be the phone call. But it made no sense. She had spoken to her grandmother. There was nothing threatening, nothing secretive. It was a conversation about pasta and loneliness. Back in her room, she hugged herself, pacing the expensive Persian rug. The silence was deafening. Every creak of the old villa, every distant footstep, sent a fresh jolt of fear through her. She thought of Mr. Henderson. Was he a prisoner too? Or had he been sent away? The thought of being completely alone here was paralyzing. A soft knock at the door made her jump. It opened before she could answer. An older woman with a severe bun and a black dress entered. She carried a tray with a silver teapot, a cup, and a small plate of biscotti. "The Don thought you might be thirsty," the woman said in Italian, her voice devoid of warmth. She placed the tray on a table without making eye contact. "Wait, please," Chiara pleaded, also in Italian. "Why are we being kept here? What is happening?" The woman's eyes, like chips of flint, flickered to Chiara's for a fraction of a second. "You are a guest of the Rossi family. It is a great honor." The words were clearly a rehearsed line. She turned and left, the lock clicking again. An honor. It felt like a death sentence. Chiara didn't touch the tea. What if it was drugged? Her paranoia was now a living thing, coiling in her stomach. She sat on the edge of the lavish bed, pulling her knees to her chest, and did something she hadn't done since she was a little girl. She cried, silent, terrified tears. Downstairs, in his private study, Don Vittorio Rossi poured 2 fingers of a deep amber whiskey. He didn't drink it. He just swirled the liquid, watching it catch the light from the single lamp on his desk. The room was dark, a sanctuary from the world. Enzo entered silently, like a ghost. Henderson is on his way back to the hotel. He was persuaded to cooperate. He will tell his firm that the Signorina Lombardo is assisting with additional due diligence at your personal request. He understands the consequences of saying anything else. Vittorio gave a curt nod. And her things? Being retrieved from the hotel now. Good. Enzo hesitated, a rare show of uncertainty. Vittorio, may I speak? An American lawyer. It is a risk. The attention. Vittorio's head lifted, his eyes glowing in the dim light. She is not just an American lawyer, Enzo. You heard her. The dialect, piccola mia. He said the words softly, almost reverently, and for a moment the fearsome Don was gone, replaced by a man haunted by a ghost. It was my mother's voice. It was her exact voice. You think she was sent? By the Lombardos? After all these years, it would be a bold move. I do not know what to think, Vittorio admitted, his voice a low growl, but until I understand the connection, she stays. I will tear her life apart, piece by piece, until I find the thread that leads back to my mother. Have Marco start digging. I want to know everything about Chiara Lombardo, her childhood, her family, her friends, everything. Enzo nodded and left. Vittorio finally took a sip of the whiskey, the burn doing nothing to soothe the turmoil inside him. The face of Chiara Lombardo, terrified, confused, beautiful, flashed in his mind. He felt a strange pull, a confusing mix of suspicion, anger, and a long dormant flicker of something else, something he couldn't afford to feel. She was a puzzle, a threat, a possible link to the most painful day of his life. He could not let her go. Hours bled into the evening. A different, younger maid brought Chiara a change of clothes, a simple, elegant linen dress that was not her own. The message was clear. Your old life is gone. You are ours now. She was then led down to a formal dining room. A table that could seat 20 was set for 1. She ate alone, every bite of the exquisite food tasting like ash. The silence was broken only by the clink of her silverware. She felt like a specimen under a microscope, constantly watched. After the agonizing meal, she was not escorted back to her room. Instead, the maid gestured for her to follow. They walked through a different wing of the villa, down a long corridor lined with portraits of severe-looking men with the same intense eyes as Don Vittorio. They arrived at a pair of double doors. The maid opened them and gestured for Chiara to enter. The Don wishes to speak with you in the library. Chiara's heart leapt into her throat. This was it, the confrontation. She stepped inside, and the doors closed behind her. The library was 2 stories high, with ladders that slid along walls of leather-bound books. A fire crackled in a massive hearth, but it did little to warm the chilling atmosphere. And there he was. Don Vittorio stood by the fire, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a crystal glass. He had changed into a dark sweater that made him look less like a corporate titan and more like what he truly was, a wolf in his natural habitat. He didn't speak at first. He just watched her, his gaze traveling from her frightened eyes to the way the borrowed dress hung on her frame. "Are you comfortable, Miss Lombardo?" he finally asked, his voice deceptively soft. Chiara clenched her fists, finding a shred of courage. Is that a joke? You've kidnapped me. My boss is gone. I'm a prisoner. What do you want from me? He took a slow step forward. I want the truth. The truth about what? I was on the phone with my grandmother. Her name is Chiara Lombardo. She lives in a small apartment in Brooklyn. She was worried I wasn't eating enough. What truth is there in that? Another step. He was closer now. She could see the firelight dancing in his eyes. The truth about why you were sent here. The truth about who you work for. I work for Henderson, Black & Steel. You know that. You were in a meeting with us. Your firm is a cover, a front for the people who sent you to get close to me. His voice hardened. The Lombardo family, my family's oldest rivals. Chiara stared at him, utterly bewildered. What are you talking about? My name is Lombardo, yes. It's a common name. I'm not part of any family rivalry. My grandmother came to America with nothing. She worked in a bakery. He was right in front of her now, so close she could feel the heat from his body. He radiated power and danger. He reached out, and this time he did touch her. His fingers, surprisingly gentle, brushed a strand of hair from her face. The contact was electric. A confusing mix of terror and something else. Something warm and unwelcome. She flinched back. The dialect you speak, he whispered, his eyes searching hers, delving deep. It is from a tiny village near Agrigento, a village my mother was from, a village that was wiped off the map in a war between our families 30 years ago. No one outside of a handful of people speaks it like that anymore. No one. So you will tell me, Chiara, who taught you? Who sent you? Tears of frustration and fear welled in her eyes. My grandmother taught me. Her family was from Agrigento. That's all. It's just my family. For a long moment he just stared at her, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. The only sound was the crackling fire. He was so close. She could see the conflict in his eyes, the ruthless boss warring with the haunted son. Slowly, he lifted his hand again, but this time he didn't touch her hair. His thumb gently brushed away a tear that had escaped and traced a path down her cheek. His touch was impossibly soft, a stark contrast to the violence she knew he was capable of. It was a moment of shocking intimacy that stole her breath. His voice was barely a whisper, laced with a pain so deep it seemed to shake the very foundations of the room. Then your grandmother, he said, holds the key to my past, and you, piccola mia, are not leaving until I have it. The touch of his thumb on her cheek was a brand. It was not the touch of a jailer, but of a man unmoored, a man seeing a ghost in her eyes. The term of endearment, piccola mia, hung in the air between them, no longer a weapon but a bridge to a pain so profound it stole the air from the room. Chiara stood frozen, her fear momentarily eclipsed by a staggering wave of confusion. The raw, unguarded agony in Don Vittorio's eyes was real. This wasn't just about business or rival families. This was about a mother, a murder. You think your mother and my grandmother are connected? She whispered, her voice trembling. The spell was broken. Vittorio's mask of vulnerability shattered, replaced by the impenetrable facade of the Don. He dropped his hand and turned his back to her, walking to the fireplace where the flames cast long, dancing shadows. The Lombardo family killed my mother 30 years ago, he stated, his voice flat and cold, as if reciting a historical fact. A shooting in the town square, a message to my father. The Lombardos were wiped out in the war that followed. Wiped out, he repeated, turning to pin her with his gaze, until you walked into my study, speaking her words in her voice. The accusation was ludicrous, yet the gravity with which he said it made her blood run cold. My grandmother came to America 50 years ago. She was a teenager. She never went back. She hated the old country, the violence. She never spoke of any of this. She worked in a bakery in Brooklyn her whole life. She is a kind, gentle old woman who grows tomatoes on her fire escape. She is not a killer. A kind, gentle old woman who taught you the secret language of my childhood, he countered, his voice dripping with skepticism. A language that was a signal, a code within my family. How do you explain that, Miss Lombardo? Coincidence? I don't know, Chiara cried out, her frustration boiling over. I don't know. She taught me the Italian she knew. That's all. Maybe her family was from the same village as yours. It's a small place, you said so yourself. That doesn't make us assassins. He studied her, his eyes like twin dark flames. He saw her genuine confusion, her terror, the tears that still glistened on her cheeks. A part of him, the part that was a strategist, knew she could be a brilliant actress. But another part, the part that had felt an inexplicable pull from the moment he saw her, wondered if the universe had delivered her to him for a reason other than war. Until I am certain, he said finally, his tone leaving no room for argument, you will remain here. You will have the run of the villa and the gardens, but you will not leave the grounds. You will not have a phone. You are a ghost in this house, Miss Lombardo, seen but not heard by the outside world. He walked to the door and opened it. Enzo was waiting in the hall. Show Miss Lombardo to the morning room. She may breakfast there, and bring her the file. The file? Chiara asked, a new dread filling her. The truth, Vittorio said without looking back. The truth about what the Lombardos did. Read it. Then tell me again about your gentle grandmother. The file was not a digital document. It was a heavy, leather-bound folio, its pages yellowed with age. Enzo placed it on a delicate writing desk in a sun-drenched room the next morning. The smell of coffee and pastries filled the air, a cruel contrast to the task before her. With trembling hands, Chiara opened it. Inside were photographs, black and white, grainy. They showed a beautiful, vibrant woman with dark, laughing eyes and a warm smile. Sofia Rossi, Vittorio's mother. There were pictures of her in a market, holding the hand of a young, serious-looking boy, Vittorio as a child. There were pictures of her in this very garden. Then the pictures changed. They showed a town square, chaotic and bloody, a body lying on the cobblestones, a dark pool spreading around it. It was Sofia. The final photo was a close-up of a wall, pockmarked with bullet holes, a stark white chalk outline tracing where a body had fallen. Chiara gagged, pushing the folio away. Her stomach churned. It was horrifying. The violence was senseless, brutal. She understood his pain now, viscerally. It was no longer an abstract concept. It was a beautiful, murdered woman. She forced herself to look further. There were typed reports in Italian detailing the investigation, the prime suspects, the Lombardo family, a rival clan fighting for control of the port. A list of names followed. Men with the name Lombardo. Her grandfather's name was there. Her great-uncle's. A cold nausea swept over her. It was all true. The war, the murder, the names. But her grandmother, Agatha? Her name was not on any list. According to the file, she had already left for America. Years before the violence erupted, she had escaped. For hours, Chiara sat in that room, staring out at the manicured gardens. Her mind was a storm. Her family, the people she loved, were connected to this horror. Her own blood was on the other side of this feud. It explained her grandmother's silence about the past, her fear of Italy, her insistence that Chiara focus on her American life. Later that afternoon, driven by a desperate need for air, she wandered into the vast garden. It was a paradise of lemon trees, jasmine, and hidden fountains. She found a secluded stone bench beneath a canopy of wisteria, its purple blossoms raining down like tears. And there, she finally broke. She buried her face in her hands and sobbed. She cried for the murdered woman. She cried for the little boy who lost his mother. She cried for the terrifying, impossible situation she was in. She didn't hear him approach. Tears will not change the past. She jolted, looking up. Vittorio stood a few feet away, his expression unreadable. He had changed out of his formal suit into dark trousers and a simple white shirt. The sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He looked more human and somehow more dangerous. "I read the file," she said, her voice thick with tears. "It's horrible. What happened to your mother was a monstrous crime. But my grandmother wasn't there. She was in New York. She had nothing to do with it." "Her family did," he said, his voice low. "Blood is blood. It demands answers. It demands justice." "Is that what this is?" she challenged, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, a spark of her old defiance returning. "Justice? Keeping me locked up because I share a name with the men who did this? I am not my grandfather. I am not a Lombardo soldier. I'm a lawyer from New York who loves her grandmother." He took a step closer, his eyes tracing the tracks of her tears on her face. The air between them grew thick, charged with a tension that was no longer just about fear and suspicion. "I look at you," he murmured, his gaze intense, "and I do not see a soldier. I see a woman who is afraid. I see a woman who cries for a woman she never knew." He paused, his voice dropping even lower. "It confuses me." He was so close now. The scent of him, clean linen, citrus, and the wild, earthy scent of the garden enveloped her. She should have been terrified. She was. But beneath the terror was a terrifying, thrilling current of attraction. He was her captor, a killer, a man of immense and dark power. But in this moment he was just a man, haunted and beautiful in the dappled sunlight. "I am confused, too," she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. His eyes dropped to her lips. For a heart-stopping moment, she thought he was going to kiss her. The world narrowed to this single, suspended point in time. The past, the violence, the fear, it all fell away, leaving only the two of them in a bower of wisteria. But then a voice cut through the silence. "Don Vittorio." Enzo stood at the entrance to the garden path, his face grim. Vittorio didn't turn, his eyes still locked on Chiara's. "What is it?" "We have a problem," Enzo said, his tone urgent. "Marco's investigation. He found something about the Signorina's grandmother." Vittorio finally broke his gaze, turning to Enzo. "And?" Enzo's eyes flickered to Chiara, then back to his boss. "Agata Lombardo did not just leave for America. She fled. She was running from her own family, and she took something with her." Vittorio went very still. "What did she take?" Enzo's voice was grave. "A diary, Don Vittorio. She took your mother's diary." The word diary seemed to suck all the sound from the garden. The chirping birds, the rustling leaves, the gentle splash of the fountain. It all fell away, leaving a vacuum of stunned silence. Chiara stared at Enzo, her mind reeling. Her grandmother? A thief? The kind, flour-dusted woman who kneaded dough and fretted over her tomato plants was now at the center of a decades-old conspiracy. It was impossible. Vittorio's reaction was different. It was not one of shock, but of dawning, furious comprehension. The muscles in his jaw tightened, a tiny nerve pulsing beneath his skin. His eyes, which had moments before been soft with a confusing tenderness, were now hard chips of amber. "My mother's diary," he repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "The one that was never found. The one the investigators said was likely destroyed in the chaos." Enzo gave a grim nod. According to the whispers Marco dug up, Chiara Lombardo was not just a bystander. She was a friend, a close friend to your mother, Sofia. When the war between the families began to escalate, she helped her. She helped her hide the diary, and then when the shooting started, she took it and fled to America, fearing both families would kill her for what she knew. Chiara found her voice, a thin, strained thing. "No, that's not true. She never mentioned any of this. She never mentioned a Sofia or a Rossi. She would have told me." Vittorio turned his burning gaze on her. Would she? If the knowledge could get her killed, could get you killed. He took a step toward her, his presence suddenly overwhelming. "Where is it?" "I don't know what. I've never seen it." "Think," he commanded, his voice cracking through the garden like a whip. "An old book, papers, a lockbox, something your grandmother treasures, something she told you to never, ever lose." His intensity was a physical force. Chiara stumbled back a step, her mind racing, sifting through a lifetime of memories in her grandmother's cluttered Brooklyn apartment. The nonna who saved every piece of string, every rubber band, who hid money in coffee tins, and... Her eyes widened. A memory, sharp and clear, surfaced. "The box," she whispered, her hand going to her throat. "The little wooden box." Vittorio was on her in an instant, his hand gripping her arm, not painfully, but with an urgency that was just as frightening. "What box?" "When I was a little girl," she said, the memory coming into focus. She had a small, inlaid wooden box. It was always locked. She kept it on the top shelf of her closet, hidden behind her winter blankets. One day, I climbed up to look at it. She caught me. She was angrier than I had ever seen her. She told me I must never, ever touch that box, that it held ghosts. She said if anything ever happened to her, I was to throw it into the East River, unopened. The look that passed between Vittorio and Enzo was electric. This was it, the holy grail of his past, the whispered thoughts of his murdered mother, was sitting in a closet in Brooklyn. "Get it," Vittorio ordered Enzo, his voice low and guttural. "I don't care how. I want that box here by tomorrow." Enzo nodded and melted back into the villa. Vittorio's grip on Chiara's arm loosened, but he didn't let go. He was looking at her differently again. The fury was still there, but it was now mixed with a desperate, hungry hope. "You will stay with me," he said, his voice softer now but no less commanding, "until the box arrives. You will eat with me. You will talk with me. You will tell me everything you remember about your grandmother. Every story, every word." He wasn't asking. He was stating a new reality. Her imprisonment had just become far more intimate. The next 24 hours were a surreal blur. Chiara was no longer confined to a guest suite. She was moved to a set of rooms adjacent to Vittorio's own private wing, still a prisoner, but now a privileged one. A gilded bird in a gilded cage, perched right next to the eagle. They ate dinner together that night in a small, intimate salon, not the cavernous dining room. The table was set for two. He asked her questions, his intense gaze never leaving her face. "Tell me about her," he prompted, swirling his wine. And so she did, haltingly at first, then with more feeling as the wine loosened her tongue, and the strangeness of the situation began to feel almost normal. She told him about Nonna Agata's hands, how they were always warm, how they smelled of yeast and basil. She told him about the stories she would tell, not of Italy but of America, of arriving with a single suitcase and a dream. She told him about her grandmother's sadness, a deep, enduring melancholy that Chiara had never understood until now. She missed home, Chiara said softly, looking into the candle flame. But she was also afraid of it. I see that now. Vittorio listened, truly listened. He didn't interrupt. He just watched her, his eyes reflecting the flickering candle light. He saw the love she had for this woman, a love that was pure and real. It chipped away at his certainty that she was a pawn. He saw her intelligence, her resilience, the way her emotions played so openly across her face. She was nothing like the cunning, duplicitous people who populated his world, and he was drawn to her irresistibly. It was a dangerous, foolish attraction, a liability for a man in his position. But as the night wore on, he found himself not caring. After dinner they walked on the main terrace under a blanket of stars. The Mediterranean was a dark, murmuring presence below. She was brave, your grandmother, Vittorio said, his voice quiet. To do what she did, to defy both families. It would have meant certain death if she had been caught. Was she really your mother's friend? Chiara asked, daring to glance up at his profile. He was silent for a long moment. I was young, but I have a memory of a young woman with kind eyes who would sometimes visit my mother in the garden. They would whisper and laugh together. I never knew her name. The Lombardo name was forbidden in our house. But yes, I believe she was. The admission was a seismic shift. The narrative of pure hatred between the families was cracking, revealing a hidden thread of friendship and loyalty. Suddenly, a cool breeze swept in from the sea. Chiara, in her light dress, shivered. Without a word, Vittorio shrugged out of his suit jacket and draped it over her shoulders. The gesture was simple, but profoundly intimate. The jacket was heavy, warm from his body, and smelled overwhelmingly of him, that intoxicating mix of citrus, clean linen, and power. It felt like an embrace. She looked up at him, her breath catching. The stars were reflected in his dark eyes. He was so close. Chiara, he murmured, her name a soft prayer on his lips. He lifted a hand and cupped her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin. This time, she didn't flinch. This time, she leaned into the touch, a silent surrender. The fear was still there, a dull hum in the background, but it was being drowned out by a louder, more compelling feeling. He bent his head, his lips hovering inches from hers. The world held its breath. The moment was shattered by the sound of a car engine roaring up the driveway, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Enzo was back. They pulled apart, the spell broken. Reality came crashing back. The diary was here. Vittorio's face hardened. The vulnerable man disappearing behind the Don's mask. He took her hand, his grip firm. Come. He led her inside, not letting go, his jacket still draped around her shoulders. In his study, Enzo stood holding a simple, inlaid wooden box. It was small, old, and looked incredibly fragile. Vittorio took it from him as if it were a holy relic. His hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly. He looked at Chiara. You open it, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You are the bridge. With a trembling hand, Chiara took the small, tarnished key that was tucked into the side of the box. She inserted it into the lock. It turned with a soft, definitive click. She lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of faded velvet, was a small, leather-bound book with a floral pattern, and tucked beside it was a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. On the front, in elegant, flowing script, were two words that made Vittorio suck in a sharp, pained breath. Per mio figlio. For my son. The study was utterly silent. The only sound, the frantic beating of Chiara's own heart. The small inlaid box sat open on Vittorio's massive desk, a portal to a painful past. The diary, the letter, per mio figlio. The words seemed to glow on the page, a mother's love reaching across 3 decades to touch her son. Vittorio stood frozen, his face a mask of such raw, unvarnished pain that Chiara's own breath caught in her throat. The powerful Don was gone. In his place was the little boy who had lost everything. He reached out a hand, his fingers hovering over the envelope as if it were a holy relic. He looked at Chiara, his eyes filled with a silent, desperate question. She gave a small, encouraging nod. "It's for you." With a tenderness that made her heart ache, he picked up the envelope. He didn't tear it open. He carefully, reverently, slit the seam with a letter opener from his desk. He unfolded the pages within, his hands trembling so visibly he had to brace them against the dark wood. Chiara stood back, giving him this private moment. She watched as his eyes scanned the lines, his expression shifting from pain to confusion to a dawning, earth-shattering horror. A low, guttural sound escaped his lips, a groan of pure agony. He staggered back a step, the pages crinkling in his white-knuckled grip. "No," he whispered, the word a broken plea. "It cannot be." "Vittorio?" Chiara asked, her voice soft with concern. She took a tentative step forward. He didn't seem to hear her. His eyes were glued to the letter, reading the words again and again as if hoping they would change. "All my life, I believed a lie." He finally looked up at her, and the devastation in his eyes was absolute. It wasn't the Lombardos. The words hung in the air, senseless. "What?" "The men who killed my mother. They were not sent by the Lombardo family." His voice was hollow, dead. "They were sent by my father." The world tilted on its axis. Chiara felt the floor lurch beneath her feet. Your father? But why?" He thrust the letter toward her, his hand shaking. "Read it." Hesitantly, Chiara took the pages. The handwriting was elegant and flowing, but the words were written with a desperate urgency. "My dearest Vittorio, my beautiful boy, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and the worst has come to pass. I write this with a heart full of fear, but I must tell you the truth. Your father, the man you look up to, is not the hero you believe him to be. He has become consumed by greed and paranoia. He believes I have been disloyal, that my friendship with Agatha Lombardo is a betrayal. He is wrong. Agatha is my only true friend, the only one I can trust. I have confided in her my fears about your father. I have told her about the secret shipments, the deals with dangerous new men from the north, the terrible things he has done. He found out. He confronted me. He said a Rossi wife does not fraternize with the enemy. He said I had shamed him. Last night he told me I would be dealt with. He said I would be made an example of. I believe he means to have me killed and blame it on the Lombardos to justify a full-scale war, a war he wants, so he can seize total control. I am so afraid, my son. Not for myself, but for you. What will he teach you? What kind of man will you become in his shadow? I have given my diary to Agatha for safekeeping. It contains all the proof. She is risking her life to help me. If I am gone, find her. Find the diary. Know the truth. Your father is a monster, and my blood is on his hands. Never forget that I love you, more than life itself. Be a better man than he is. Be kind. Be just. My love for you will be with you, always. Your mother, Sophia." Tears streamed down Chiara's face as she finished reading. The horror of it was unimaginable. A husband ordering the murder of his own wife. A father orchestrating a lie that would poison his son's entire life. The weight of Vittorio's grief, now twisted by this monstrous betrayal, was suffocating. She looked up at him. He had sunk into his chair, his head in his hands, his broad shoulders slumped in defeat. He looked utterly broken. Without thinking, she moved. She went to him, kneeling beside his chair. She placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Vittorio," she whispered, "I'm so sorry." He flinched at her touch but didn't pull away. He lifted his head, his eyes red-rimmed and haunted. 30 years, he rasped. For 30 years, I have hated the Lombardo name. I have built my life on a foundation of vengeance for a crime they did not commit. I have done terrible things in the name of that lie. His voice broke, and all the while I was serving the man who truly took her from me. I loved him. I respected him. The sheer magnitude of his pain was a physical force in the room. Chiara's own fear of him evaporated, replaced by a profound, aching compassion. She understood now the source of the darkness in him, the coldness that shielded a heart shattered in childhood. "What will you do?" she asked softly. A dangerous cold light began to flicker in the depths of his eyes, cutting through the devastation. The dawn was re-emerging, forged anew in the fires of this terrible truth. The man who gave the order is dead. My father died 5 years ago, a respected, grieving widower. The bitterness in his voice was corrosive, but the man who pulled the trigger, he still lives. He is one of my most trusted captains, a man who has eaten at my table, a man I called amico. He spat the word. He looked me in the eye all these years, knowing he murdered my mother on my father's command. He stood up abruptly, the movement full of lethal grace. The broken boy was gone, replaced by the capo, his purpose, clear and terrifying. "Vittorio, wait," Chiara said, standing up. "What are you going to do?" "Justice," he said, the word a final judgment. At last, true justice. He strode to the door and called for Enzo. When his consigliere entered, Vittorio handed him the letter. "Read it." Enzo's face, usually an unreadable mask, paled as he read. He looked up at Vittorio, his expression one of horror and grim understanding. "Don Vittorio, the man who did this, Salvatore, bring him to me, now." Enzo nodded, his face set in grim lines. "It will be done." As Enzo left, Vittorio turned back to Chiara. The rage in his eyes was terrifying, but when he looked at her it softened, just for a moment. "You should go to your room," he said, his voice rough. "What happens next? You should not see." But Chiara stood her ground. She had been dragged into the heart of this darkness. She had seen his soul stripped bare. She couldn't just walk away now. "No," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I'm not going anywhere." He studied her, a complex emotion swirling in his gaze, surprise, respect, and that undeniable magnetic pull. He didn't argue. He simply nodded. An hour later, Salvatore, a jovial, heavy-set man in his 60s, was ushered into the study. He smiled, clapping Vittorio on the shoulder. "Vittorio, you called for me. Is it about the shipment from Naples?" Vittorio didn't smile back. He stood perfectly still, his mother's letter in his hand. "Salvatore," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Do you remember my mother?" The smile vanished from Salvatore's face. A flicker of fear crossed his eyes. "Sophia. Of course, I remember her. A beautiful woman. A terrible tragedy." "A tragedy you carried out," Vittorio said. his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. Salvatore took a step back, his face draining of all color. "Vittorio, what are you talking about? The Lombardos." "The Lombardos were innocent," Vittorio roared, the sound exploding through the room. He threw the letter onto the desk in front of Salvatore. "My father gave the order, and you Cain, you pulled the trigger." Salvatore's eyes darted to the letter, to Chiara, to the door where Enzo now stood, blocking any escape. He knew the game was up. The genial mask fell away, revealing the cold-blooded killer beneath. "It was a different time, Vittorio. Your father, he was the Don. His word was law. His word was a lie." Vittorio advanced on him, a panther moving in for the kill. "You killed an innocent woman. You let me live a lie. You looked me in the eye for 30 years. He didn't give an order. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes was command enough." Enzo and another man moved forward. Salvatore began to beg, his voice rising in panic. "Vittorio, please. I was loyal to your father. I am loyal to you." Vittorio turned his back, walking towards the window, looking out at the sea his mother had loved. He spoke a single, final word, his voice cold and absolute. "Finiscilo. Finish it." Chiara stood frozen, watching as the men dragged the screaming, pleading Salvatore from the room. She knew what "finish it" meant. Justice in this world was swift and brutal. She should have been horrified, and a part of her was, but a larger part looked at Vittorio's solitary, rigid figure by the window and saw not a monster, but a son who had just avenged his mother. The door closed, and silence descended once more. The truth was out. The killer was being dealt with. The war was over before it had even truly begun. Vittorio remained at the window for a long time. Then slowly, he turned to face her. The rage was gone, replaced by an immense, weary sorrow. "It is done," he said. Chiara simply nodded, her eyes full of tears for the little boy he had been and the man he had been forced to become. He walked towards her, stopping just in front of her. He reached out and cupped her face, his thumb wiping away a tear that had escaped. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for bringing me the truth." In that moment, the last wall between them crumbled. The prisoner and the jailer were gone. All that remained were a man and a woman, bound together by a terrible, tragic secret, and a connection that had grown in the darkest of places. He leaned in, and this time there was no one to interrupt them. His lips met hers in a kiss that was not one of conquest, but of gratitude, of shared pain, of a desperate, burgeoning hope. It was soft and searching, a balm on both their wounded souls. And as Chiara kissed him back, she knew her life would never be the same again. The kiss was a silent earthquake, reshaping the landscape of their entire world. It was not the kiss of a predator claiming his prey, nor was it the hesitant touch of newfound affection. It was a communion, a meeting of two shattered souls finding an unexpected shelter in one another. It was filled with the salt of Chiara's tears and the bitter ashes of Vittorio's past. When they finally broke apart, the study was no longer a place of intimidation and fear. It was a sanctuary, hallowed by the truth that had just been unearthed. The air was still thick with the ghost of Salvatore's fate, but a new fragile peace had settled over them. Vittorio rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed, his breathing slowly returning to normal. Chiara's hands, which had come up to rest tentatively on his chest, could feel the frantic beating of his heart, gradually slow to a steady, powerful rhythm. "I am not the man you think I am," he whispered, his voice raw. "The things I have done, the man my father made me." "I know who you are," Chiara replied softly, her voice steady. "I've seen you. The man who loves his mother. The man who craved justice, not just revenge. The man who was gentle with me, even when he held all the power." He pulled back to look at her, his honey-colored eyes searching hers, desperate to believe her. In their depths, she saw the little boy from the photographs, forever scarred but not lost. "You are free, Chiara," he said, the words seeming to cost him something. "The car will take you back to your hotel, to your life. You have my eternal gratitude and my deepest apologies." He was letting her go. The words should have been a liberation, a trumpet blast announcing her freedom, but instead they felt like a door closing, a sudden and profound loss. To walk out of this villa, to get on a plane, to return to her sterile apartment and the endless cycle of corporate law in New York. The thought was unbearably empty. This gilded cage had inexplicably become her home. This dangerous, complicated man had become her anchor. "What if I don't want to go?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. A storm of conflict raged in his eyes, hope warring with practicality, desire battling a lifetime of isolation. "This life, my life, it is not for you. It is darkness and blood. You belong in the light." "Maybe the light isn't where I belong anymore," she said, her hand moving from his chest to cup his cheek. "Maybe I belong right here." That was all the permission he needed. He kissed her again, this time with less desperation and more certainty, acclaiming that was as much her choice as it was his. When he lifted her into his arms and carried her from the study, not to a prison cell, but to the master suite, his room, it felt like the most natural progression in the world. The world outside, with its rules and its judgments, ceased to exist. The days that followed were a world unto themselves, a suspended reality of sun-drenched intimacy. Chiara's imprisonment had officially ended, but she had no desire to leave the confines of the villa or the circle of Vittorio's arms. They spent their mornings in the garden, where he would tell her stories of his mother, real stories, not the sanitized legends, but small, precious memories of her laughter, her love for the lemon trees, the way she hummed old Sicilian folk songs. Chiara, in turn, would share more about Agatha, painting a picture of a brave, lonely woman haunted by a secret she could never share. "I need to see her," Chiara said one afternoon, her head resting in his lap as they lounged on a sofa in the library. "I need to tell her that it's over, that she's safe." Vittorio's hand, which had been stroking her hair, stilled. "She may not believe you. The fear, it runs deep." "Then you will come with me," Chiara said, looking up at him. It was not a question. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable. "To Brooklyn. You want me to go to Brooklyn?" "I want my grandmother to meet the man I love," she said simply. The words hung in the air between them. It was the first time either of them had said it aloud. Love. It was a word that had no place in the vocabulary of a man like Vittorio Rossi. Power, respect, fear, loyalty. These were the pillars of his existence. Love was a vulnerability, a liability, a weakness his father would have beaten out of him. And yet, as he looked into Chiara's clear, fearless eyes, he knew it was the truest thing in his life. He had loved his mother. And now, against all odds and all reason, he loved this woman who had fallen from the sky and dismantled his entire world, only to help him rebuild it. He bent down and kissed her, a slow, deep kiss that was his silent, profound answer. A week later, they stood on the sidewalk outside a modest brownstone in Brooklyn. The contrast was jarring. The cacophony of New York City, the blaring horns, the shouting, the sheer chaotic energy, was a universe away from the serene, controlled silence, of the Rossi villa. Chiara squeezed Vittorio's hand. He was dressed in a simple, impeccably tailored dark suit, looking every inch the European businessman, but she could feel the tension thrumming through him. He was in uncharted, enemy territory. She used her key to open the door to her grandmother's ground-floor apartment. The familiar smell of simmering tomato sauce and fresh basil washed over them, a scent that had defined Chiara's childhood. "Nonna, sono io," she called out. Agata Lombardo emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a flower-print apron. Her face, a network of gentle wrinkles, lit up at the sight of her granddaughter. "Chiara, mio angelo, you are home early. I did not expect." Her words died in her throat. Her eyes, the same warm brown as Chiara's, landed on Vittorio. The smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated terror. The wooden spoon she was holding clattered to the floor. "No," she whispered, her hand flying to her chest. She took a stumbling step back, her eyes darting towards the phone as if expecting the police to burst in. "Chiara, get away from him." "Nonna, no, it's okay." Chiara rushed forward, taking her grandmother's trembling hands. "It's okay. He knows everything." Agata's terrified gaze remained fixed on Vittorio. "He is a Rossi. He is here to kill me, for the diary." Vittorio took a slow, careful step forward. He did not approach her like a don, but with a respectful deference Chiara had rarely seen in him. He stopped a few feet away and gave a small, formal bow of his head. "Signora Lombardo," he said, his voice soft, the Sicilian cadence pronounced and gentle. "I am not here as a Rossi. I am here as Sofia's son." At the mention of that name, Agata's tough facade crumbled. A sob escaped her lips. "Sofia," she wept. "My beautiful Sofia. She spoke of you in her letter." Vittorio continued, his own voice growing thick. "She called you her only true friend. She said you were brave. You saved her voice. You saved her for me. For 30 years, I thought I had nothing of her, and you gave her back to me." He reached into his inner jacket pocket and carefully withdrew the small, floral-patterned diary. He held it out, not as a threat, but as an offering. Agata stared at it, her body shaking with silent sobs. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached out and took it, clutching it to her heart as if it were Sofia herself. "I am sorry," she cried, looking from the diary to Vittorio. "I am so sorry I could not save her." "You did," Vittorio said, his voice breaking. "You saved the most important part of her. The truth. You have nothing to apologize for. I owe you a debt that can never be repaid." He then did something that shattered the last of Chiara's defenses and cemented her love for him forever. He closed the distance between them, and in a gesture of profound respect and gratitude, he took Agata's small, wrinkled hand and brought it to his lips. "Grazie," he whispered. "Thank you for protecting my mother, and thank you," he added, his eyes finding Chiara's, "for the greatest gift you could have ever given me." The understanding dawned on Agata's face. She looked from Vittorio's earnest, pained expression to her granddaughter's radiant, tearful one. The fear in her eyes melted away, replaced by a dawning, wondrous acceptance. She saw not a Mafia boss, but a wounded man finally made whole. She saw the love that shone between them, a love that had miraculously grown from the poisoned soil of their family's past. She reached up and cupped his face, her touch gentle. "You have her eyes," she whispered, "my Sofia's eyes." She then pulled Chiara into a fierce, tight embrace. "And you, my crazy girl," she said, laughing and crying at once. Only you could fall in love with a Sicilian king. They stayed for dinner. It was the most surreal and beautiful evening of Chiara's life. They sat around the small formica-topped table in the kitchen, eating Agata's legendary lasagna. Vittorio, the man who commanded armies of men and decided fates with a single word, listened with rapt attention as Agata told stories of his mother that he had never heard, silly, funny human stories that painted a picture of a woman full of life, not just a saintly ghost. The last of the barriers between the Rossis and the Lombardos crumbled into dust, replaced by the shared, sacred memory of Sofia. 2 months later, Chiara stood on the same balcony where her nightmare had begun. But everything had changed. The Mediterranean was a sheet of molten gold in the setting sun. The villa was no longer her prison, but her home. She had not returned to her old job. Instead, from a sunlit office in the villa, she had begun working with a team of lawyers to quietly, legally, disentangle the Rossi empire from its darker, more violent enterprises. It was a monumental task, the work of a lifetime, but it was a future she believed in, a future she was building with him. Strong arms wrapped around her waist from behind, and she leaned back into Vittorio's solid, warm strength. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling deeply. "You are thinking," he murmured against her skin. "I was thinking about the first time I stood here," she said softly. "I was so scared." He turned her in his arms to face him. His eyes, once so cold and calculating, now held a warmth that was for her and her alone. And now I've never felt safer. She reached up and traced the line of his jaw. "I was thinking about something else, too." "What?" She took a deep breath. "My grandmother asked me when we were going to give her a great-grandchild." Vittorio went perfectly still. The world seemed to hold its breath with him. The question of a future, of a family, was one they had tiptoed around. For a man whose own childhood had been destroyed by his bloodline, the idea of continuing it was fraught with complexity. He searched her face, his expression a mixture of hope and fear. "And what did you tell her?" "I told her she would have to be patient," Chiara said, a smile playing on her lips, "but that I was working on it." A slow, radiant smile spread across Vittorio's face. A sight so rare and beautiful it still made her heart stutter. It was the smile of the little boy from the photographs, finally free. "Piccola mia," he whispered, his voice filled with a love so deep it was terrifying in its intensity. "My Chiara, you have given me back my past, and now you give me a future." He lowered his head and kissed her, a kiss that was a vow, a promise, a new beginning under the Sicilian sun. It was a kiss that held the echoes of a tragic past, but was filled with the brilliant, unshakable hope of a tomorrow they would build together. The story of the Rossis and the Lombardos, once a tale of hatred and bloodshed, had found its end, and in its place, a new story was just beginning. And so, a story that began with a shocking phone call ends with a promise of a new future. From the depths of a dark past, love found a way. If you were moved by Chiara and Vittorio's journey, if you believe in the power of truth and love to conquer even the deepest hatred, then do us a favor. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss another epic story. Leave a comment below telling us your favorite moment. Was it the discovery of the diary, the confrontation with Salvatore, the emotional meeting with Nonna Agata? We read every single one. And share this video with a friend who loves a gripping romance. Thank you for watching.